So you finally get that project signed. Maybe you've been working on it for months and months, and now the contract has been signed. The client has paid a deposit into your account. Happy days. But what happens from here? Well, more often than not, now the pressure starts. The client is really pushing you as fast as possible to get on site, and maybe the architect's pushing you too. Because once they've handed over some money or they've signed a contract, they want ground broken immediately and they want to see some progress. The problem is for you as the main contractor is that maybe you need a little bit of time to prepare and get plans for how this site is going to run and everything you need to put in place before you actually turn up on site and begin work. So what I've done for you is I've just prepared a 66-point checklist to ensure that your sites can run the right way or be set up the right way every single time. And what we want you to do is be able to replicate this site setup over and over again. So you could potentially take this checklist, delete what's not applicable for you on certain sites, and you can run with it over and over again. So it's going to be a really useful tool for you to make sure your sites are run the right way. So I just want to talk you through some of the features of this checklist and some of the things you might want to think about in your specific company. So one of the first things we want to focus on in this checklist is the planning phase. So immediately you'll notice there with planning, you're probably going to do a little bit of a site survey. And the site survey is going to reveal a few things for you. It's going to show you, are there specific utilities that need to be moved? Do you need to start contacting utility companies to arrange that? If you do, that could potentially be months in organising. So you want to get on that immediately and have that site survey done. You also might need to submit some health and safety notices. So in the UK, there's an F10 notice that needs to go to the HSE if it's a large project. So in your specific area, your specific project requirements might include that too. And of course, you want to make sure all the planning permissions and all the permits and all the regulations have all been approved before you even think about starting on site. So make sure you've gathered all that documentation together. Then we come on to the actual project documentation itself. So clearly you're going to need all the approved drawings, and you want to make sure it's the up-to-date drawings too. So what I would suggest is having a drawing register because drawings change all the time on a project potentially. So make sure you've got an up-to-date drawings register on site, and then if an updated drawing comes on, you can change the register and say, actually, we're now working off revision B or revision C of that specific drawing. So that can be really useful too. So get all your project documentation in place for that specific project, including your permits and licenses that we spoke about earlier, and of course any insurances that you may need for that project too. You also want to think about your internal software and systems. So no doubt you're probably using project management tools, or you may be using spreadsheets to run this project. Make sure they're all set up as well from day one. You don't want to be halfway through the project and realizing you need to start uploading some stuff onto your software. So ensure you've got your project management software up to date. For us, we used to use an app called Cost Tracker to run all our projects and track all the costs. You may be using something like Builder Trend, or there's loads of different software applications out there that can do a really good job of this. So make sure it's all set up on that, and of course on your accounting software like Xero or QuickBooks. You too want to think about your site security and access. So you might need to be putting up temporary fences, Harris fencing or barriers to make sure there's no unauthorized access to site and to keep it safe. Make sure no kids can get onto the site. You may have to think about your visitor sign in and sign out if it's a busy site. So think about that thing too. We touched on utilities already. So yeah, this needs organising. You may need a temporary water supply or temporary electrics on site for your office or for the toilets, things like that. So make sure all of that is arranged well in advance. And leading on from that, you need to think about your facilities. So you're clearly going to need a welfare facility, somewhere where all the workers can sit down and have their lunch. You need sanitation facilities, so somewhere they can go to the toilet and wash their hands and things like that, and a break area. So all of those things need to be thought about, and you need to think about not just getting them on site, but where are you actually going to position them so that you can access it nice and easily, and it's not going to be in the way of the actual build. 2, we've got the traffic and pedestrian management. So if you're potentially crossing onto a highway and you're crossing over a pedestrian access, you'll need to think about how you're going to deal with that traffic management. So when you've got big heavy machinery or lorries that are coming in and out of your site, you really need to be aware of the health and safety obligations you have around that to make sure they're not crossing the pedestrian road without it being managed fully. So make sure you get your traffic management plan in place. And 2, you want to think about your equipment and materials. So not just about what you're going to potentially need on site in advance. So you might want to think about the procurement of materials well in advance, but where are you going to position it on the site? Whereabouts on the site is it going to go, so that all of a sudden you don't realise you've got a trench to dig and you've just had a massive load of materials delivered, and steel and timber and everything else, and it's right on top of that trench that you need to dig. So really plan out the site storage, especially if it's a tight site. You need to really think about that and where it's all going to go. And of course, a quick point there about where you're going to store your hazardous or flammable materials too. That needs to be thought about also. You may have some environmental protection procedures that you need to think about. So it could be things like trees. There might be tree protection orders in place where you might have to protect certain tree roots. There may be natural wildlife habitats that you need to protect. So not thinking about these things can result in huge fines if you get this wrong. So make sure you're complying with any permits and regulations on the environmental policies. And also think about your waste management too. You can save a fortune by your waste management if you can segregate waste and get it taken away, like, you know, putting all your plasterboard in one corner and your timber in another. So think about your waste management too, because that can be cost saving, and it's just a nice green way to build. Of course, you've got to think about your your worker health and safety. So make sure all that documentation's in place. In the UK, the HSE, the body that manages health and safety, they are actively looking at sites all the time. They can come onto a site and they can shut you down and fine you immediately if they see that you haven't got your right documentation in place. So it's absolutely crucial that from day one, this has all been prepared and you've got a nice site folder sitting there on site, so that if anyone does turn up, you can show them that you've thought about this already. And of course, we want to protect our workers, so make sure that's all in place also. Think about the communication between all stakeholders, so between the architects and the clients and the project managers, whoever it is that you need to talk to. Has that been established? How are you going to communicate together? Get your project schedule on site. It's always great to have a big Gantt chart or project timeline printed and stuck on the site office, so everyone knows exactly what they're working to and what progress milestones they need to hit. Think about your quality assurance. How are you going to measure quality on the site? You might have a quality management plan on how you're going to inspect and test things and monitor that all the way through. And then, of course, you want to think about your emergency preparedness too. So have you got a first aid kit, obviously, on site? Have you got fire extinguishers? Have you got an evacuation plan if you all needed to leave site quickly also? So quite a lot to run through there. I've only just literally skimmed through that document, but that's a 66-point document. Now, some of that you might look at and think, I don't need that on my sites. That's way over the top. Well, that's fine. You can just go in there and I would just suggest delete out all the things you don't need. But as you start to grow as a company and start winning larger projects, you might all of a sudden realise that there are things in here, this checklist, that you hadn't thought about before and you really do need. So I would keep that checklist, download it, save it into your standard operating procedures, and what it's going to result in is a perfect site setup every single time. You can just give that document to your admin team or your project managers, and you can be safe in the knowledge that if they actually tick through that whole list, you're pretty much covered on your perfect site setup, and it's going to run the right way. So I hope that's useful. One thing we really pride ourselves on in our Develop Mastermind is we help you set up all the right software and systems you need to make sure your sites are running like well-oiled machines. This is just really one small part of it. So if you want to talk to us about how we can potentially help you get your company running the right way, reach out, let's have a chat, and we'll see if we're a good fit.